Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects the food on your plate to the bigger world. I'm your host, Dana DePrima. Food is more than just food, you know that, right? It's health and community, protecting land and water. It's building strong local economies. And the truth is, so much of what we care about is shaped by systems and decisions that most of us never see. Today, we're talking about one of the most important food issues in America, one that affects millions of children every single day: hunger. For many families, putting food on the table has become increasingly difficult. Grocery prices remain high, housing costs continue to rise, safety net programs face uncertainty, and while hunger can feel like a problem happening somewhere else, the reality is that it exists in every community, every state, and every kind of neighborhood. My guest today is Rachel Sabella, director of No Kid Hungry New York. She returns to the podcast to help us understand what child hunger looks like right now, why so many families are struggling, what programs are making a difference, and what challenges lie ahead. This conversation is about more than food. It's about opportunity. Because when children don't have reliable access to nutritious meals, it affects their health, their ability to learn, their development, and ultimately, their future. If you've ever wondered how school meals work, why food assistance programs matter, or what role all of us can play in making sure kids have enough to eat, this episode will give you a much clearer picture of what's happening behind the scenes. And by the end, you'll understand why ensuring that every child has access to food may be one of the most important investments we can make in our communities. Let's dig in.
It has been a very difficult and challenging year in the anti-hunger space. The last time we spoke, Congress was in negotiations around budget bills. This was spring of 2025 and, different plans for SNAP. And then on July 3rd, 2025, Congress passed a budget bill that decimates the SNAP program and what that does for families. So as part of HR 1, they included a couple of things that changed SNAP. So number one, there's $200 billion in cuts to benefit levels over the next 10 years. So a benefit that's already inadequate among rising costs will become even harder for people to purchase food on. They changed it so that there's cost sharing now. So states are responsible. So starting October 1st of this current year, states that used to put in 50% of administrative costs and have that matched by the government 50% now have to put in 75%.
What those administrative costs, what does that mean exactly?
So that is how they run the program, from operating staff to outreach enrollment to people that are working with SNAP recipients to fill out their paperwork, to make sure that they have submitted everything appropriately. They're making it harder for those states to do that work. And there's a lot of talk about fraud and abuse, but we're making it harder for states to hire staff to lower those rates and do those problems and not put funds in. Like, one of the best ways to attack fraud and abuse is to make SNAP cards chip enabled, right? Like anybody's credit card is, but that wasn't there. A lot of this is just to make it harder. In the next couple of years, USDA is rolling out, as part of this bill, that depending on your error rates, states will have to contribute to the SNAP benefit level for the first time. And what this could mean is some states may choose to opt out of the program or limit who can do that. And at a time when hunger is on the rise, costs are on the rise, this is not the time to destroy a program that we all know is the first line of defense against hunger.
So let's get really elementary here,
Yeah.
because SNAP has long been a part of the Farm Bill. And mainly, I think it started because Congress wanted to help farmers and connect the dots with people who needed food. So, what is going through the minds of people in Congress who are excited about reducing SNAP so much?
I wish I had a better answer to that question because to me, there is no reason to do this. When we think about the SNAP program, we think about those individuals who face food insecurity, who meet federal guidance to be eligible for the program. You hit it on the nail talking about the farmers. We've heard so much from that community because it's the local food being purchased in so many states. You can use your SNAP benefits. You can also get additional support if you go to a green market or to a farmer's market and purchase directly from there. The economic impact is something that I talk about over and over again. We think about the local businesses that accept this. So in November, when the government shutdown happened and SNAP benefits did not go out, we heard so much from local grocery stores. Some of the ones in New York City, 70% of their monthly revenue came from SNAP recipients. So that is hitting the local economy that everyone talks about being important, but this after effect. And it's, as we said, it's the stores, it's the farmers. What about the truckers that are bringing the food in? The packaging facilities, in so many ways, this is going to harm the economy. And I have talked about that to elected officials, to media. We did a great op-ed in the Staten Island Advance in New York City with the National Supermarket Association, purely from the economic standpoint. So when I hear Congress talking about this, I get so frustrated. I also know it's not the will of the people. We just recently did a poll, and the majority of respondents said to us they know SNAP supports the local economy. They know that SNAP helps families put food on the table. They don't want people to play politics with food. And what Congress did is so disappointing. They still can roll it back and make those changes, but we haven't seen them take those steps yet.
There is a persistent misunderstanding of hunger as an individual problem rather than as an economic one. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is often framed as a social assistance program, but in practice it functions more like economic infrastructure. Money moves quickly from recipients to grocery stores, farmers, distributors, truckers, processors, and local businesses, creating a ripple effect that supports entire regional economies. Research has consistently shown that every dollar spent through SNAP generates additional economic activity because benefits are spent almost immediately on essential goods. By shifting costs to states and reducing benefits at a time when food prices remain elevated, policymakers are not simply reducing government spending, they're removing purchasing power from communities that depend on it most. The paradox is that efforts justified in the name of fiscal responsibility may ultimately increase strain elsewhere on food banks, healthcare systems, schools, and local businesses, while weakening one of the few programs designed to stabilize both families and food markets during periods of economic uncertainty. Let's talk about what it means on a family level. What are you hearing?
We hear from families how hard this is, how afraid they are, number one, how this affordability crisis that's been going on for a few years continues to get worse. We think about rising rents. We think about, depending on where you were in this country, a lot of us had very harsh winters this year. So your heating bills went up significantly, your electricity bills go up, your transportation costs go up. In the last few weeks, since the change in the situation in the Middle East, gas prices are going up. So for families to keep a roof over their heads and to stay warm during the snowmageddons we faced, what they're moving in their budget is food. And now with these cuts happening, it's going to be that much harder for them. And they're telling us they're making choices at the grocery store. They're not purchasing healthy food. They're purchasing rice. We have parents tell us they don't eat until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They skip breakfast because they want to make sure their children are eating. That's not okay. That's not who we are as a country, as a society. We've got to change this and do better.
So, on all of the political sides here, well, let's just go to Maha, for example. There are a lot of conversations or statements coming out of the Maha offices that we want to support families, make sure that they're eating healthy, that they're not eating processed foods, and that we're elevating meats
Yeah.
and dairies. What's the impact of SNAP on that sort of thing?
That's why this is so much in conflict to me. If we want to make people healthy and we want to give people choices and allow them to purchase the fresh foods and vegetables, we have to make sure the funds are there and that we're also supporting those farmers that are growing those foods. Because I worry as these benefits are cut, somebody who had a farm, who had some of that produce, right, that people were purchasing, as less people are able to buy that, can they keep their farm going? So, what is that long term impact? So, really, this is in a direct contradiction to what the Maha movement says.
So I know that you're obviously very focused on New York. That's your
Mhm.
job. But I'm curious when we're looking at the cuts across the United
Yeah.
States and the shift in financial responsibility,
Mhm.
administering things more on a state level.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are states that are heavily Republican that are going to suffer from this. And I feel like this is a political thing. We don't really understand all of the details of like why and how this is happening. But aren't those states going to suffer pretty dramatically under these cuts?
I think we're waiting to see. So number one, yes, because the 200 billion in benefit cuts is going to be felt everywhere. There is no community that will be exempt from that. What I think has been really interesting as we have seen different programs come about, whether it's states focusing on universal school meals where every child gets a free breakfast or a lunch. In the last few years, when the country was able to opt into the summer EBT program, so grocery benefit program similar to SNAP for eligible children, we saw that happening in red and blue states. In 2025, two governors made breakfast free for every child in their state and opted into summer EBT. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, a Democrat, and Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, a Republican. To me, what that shows is it's not about politics. And people and leaders are working, and again, seeing this as a moral issue to do what's right. So I hope that that's what we see, that in states they continue to work together to opt into programs, to see how they protect the SNAP benefits and keep it running. And again, look at it from different sides. There's a lot of jobs tied to SNAP. We don't want those jobs to go away. We want those local businesses to be at the heart of this, the agriculture community. So there are fears, but I have to have hope. New York, I know, can be a different state, but when we did universal school meals, it was Democrats and Republicans standing together. It wasn't about politics. Same thing on increased funding to food pantries and soup kitchens. So I hope we continue to see that across the country and that state leaders come together to do what's right. And this is when we need the federal government to do what's right and to follow what their counterparts are doing at the state level.
I feel like there's some hope on the federal level that they'll cut programs for SNAP, which
Mhm.
other farming related
Mhm.
programs, maybe bring back a little of it and say, like, okay, well, see, we're actually doing something. These are some of the concerns I have and have been, really watching the
Mhm.
math. But I think that there's some hope that they'll be able to take it off the federal budget and push it to states in one form or another, not just the
Mhm.
administrative part, but maybe other state run programs
Mhm.
under a different name that have the same purpose. I can't imagine that states are okay with their constituents having severe food insecurity. What do you think is going to happen?
I think what we're seeing is states pushing back. And as the federal government says, oh, we'll push the costs onto states. So state budgets are so much tighter this year and so much harder, and they are being forced to make choices. I worry You think about how much of the Medicaid costs are pushed onto states now under HR1, same with SNAP. It's generally the same people receiving that. We don't want to pit programs against each other. We want these to work together to help people for as long as they need them. And then when they no longer need them, they've done what they needed to do. This can support others. So I think our state leaders, and we hear it from people on both sides of the aisle, that they want change. They're going to Washington, D.C., they are doing op-eds. I want to see more of that. And we want them to keep talking about these programs, but no one wants to see this.
I'm curious about what you know federally or on the New York state level. I mean, SNAP is one big program. Obviously, we've counted on for many, many years. What other kinds of programs are there? And I'm kind of obsessed at the moment with this shell game of the dollars, right? This conversation highlights a reality that is often overlooked in discussions about food insecurity. Hunger is rarely caused by food alone. For many families, the grocery bill is simply the most flexible expense in a budget squeezed by rising housing costs, utilities, transportation, and healthcare. When financial pressure mounts, food becomes the shock absorber for every other economic hardship. The result is a quiet form of deprivation that rarely shows up in statistics. Parents skipping meals so their children can eat, families choosing calorie-dense foods over nutrient-dense ones, and long-term health being sacrificed to survive the current month. What makes this especially striking is the contradiction between public health goals and economic policy. While leaders encourage Americans to eat more fresh, locally grown foods and reduce reliance on processed products, reducing purchasing power makes those healthier choices increasingly inaccessible. The conversation reveals that food policy is not simply about feeding people. It's about shaping the conditions under which people can make healthy choices in the first place. Without affordability, nutrition becomes less a matter of personal responsibility and more a reflection of economic circumstance. In that sense, the debate around SNAP is also a debate about whether health, dignity, and opportunity are treated as investments worth protecting or privileges reserved for those who can afford them. So I just want to be able to follow that money and just to see what other kinds of programs we should be looking at when we're thinking about family and child hunger.
So, number one, we should be looking at school meal programs. So, school breakfast, school lunch, summer meals programs, and all of these programs intersect in a lot of ways. So, if somebody is a SNAP recipient, it often means the child is eligible for no cost school meals, how those funds move. So, if less people are receiving SNAP, that could mean that their child no longer receives a free school meal as we get into the wonky details and see how it plays out. So that means those parents lose that support that was helping them to stretch their budget. We often say at No Kid Hungry that summer is the hungriest time of year because of schools being closed and kids not going in 5 days a week. But so many school buildings offer free school meals to eligible families. But if there are less funds for that, or as some of the agriculture programs have been cut that help to support more of a farm to school angle, that's less support for those nutritious foods. And it's more of the processed food that they can get on a budget, especially with rising costs. So we're going back in those circles. You want to support the economy, you want to make America healthy again, but we're cutting the programs and the supports that do just that. Those are things, we're keeping an eye on. I referenced the summer EBT program. It's grocery benefits, $120 per eligible child. But in New York State, that was more than 2 million children were eligible. That's $235 million approximately going back into the local economy that they could use at a grocery store, they could use online, they could use as a farmer's market. So we want those programs to keep going. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Nobody's pretending that that benefit is adequate to feed a child for 3 months, but it's there and it's supporting people. I also think about, what did we learn in the pandemic? one of the most impactful programs that helped to support families was the child tax credit. And we've seen the rollback of that at the federal level. We've seen some states expand it, which has been great, but we've got to get back to that because these are tried and true programs that make a difference.
I had an interview really with someone in the innovation space, and it was pretty interesting. But one of the things that really stuck with me is that the Nielsen skews on grocery store receipts, a tremendous amount of data, show that SNAP recipients skew healthier on their grocery store receipts, which I'm not trying to give anybody a pat on the back or grades or anything, but I think it does dispel a myth that we have about SNAP recipients are using their dollars for unhealthy food. Maybe soda shouldn't be an eligible purchase, but the data shows that SNAP recipients are eating more healthily than people who are not on SNAP.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think there's so many myths out there where people are saying things that are just plain wrong. And we can put out the correct information, but it's not always being absorbed. I think that's one. From a personal lens, I have ulcerative colitis. And so some of the definitions that we see that are healthy food actually can cause me significant issues. And now I recognize I am privileged and I can purchase my own food and choices. But for someone else, having that choice with SNAP allows them to get the food that's healthy for them in this case. And that's something I think so much about as how, or if you have an allergy to certain types of things, we want there to be choice. And the data is showing you people are making the healthy choices, not about the sodas and the candies. What we hear from families, I was so excited that we could get berries for my kids today. I mean, I had a reporter last year say to me, raspberries in my grocery store are probably the same price as a diamond, just based on where costs were at that time. It's like, well, maybe not that bad. But I see it in the grocery store. We watch people. I've done it myself. When you weigh and you're at the counter and you're waiting to pay and you see what this cost is. Can you do it? And we want people to be able to buy their children those healthy items and let them grow stronger.
What other myths are there out there that we're not absorbing?
I think one of the big myths is tied to immigration and how undocumented individuals receive SNAP. No, they don't. You have to have had a green card for 5 years to be eligible for SNAP as an adult. Now, maybe there are certain instances tied to a refugee status or something, but nobody is just being handed a card. And to be eligible for SNAP, you have to submit so much data and paperwork and show your incomes and your energy costs and various things. And then you have to keep getting recertified because there's information about that out there. Well, people just get it forever. No, that's not the case. The recertification is so important in this. So those are ones that jump out at me very often. And again, I guess I wouldn't call it a myth, but the people don't make the connection between SNAP and the economy. When they say, I love my local grocery store. Yes. And when you take the SNAP benefit away from your local grocery store, it makes it harder for them to stay in your community.
When families have access to consistent support, they are often able to purchase more fresh produce, accommodate dietary restrictions, and make longer-term decisions about health, rather than simply stretching calories to the end of the month. What emerges is a broader lesson about human behavior. People tend to make better choices when scarcity is reduced, not when it's intensified. The discussion also exposes how easily misinformation can shape policy, whether through misconceptions about fraud, immigration, or dependency, despite evidence that assistance programs are highly regulated and frequently reassessed. In many ways, the debate is less about food than about trust, whether society trusts struggling families to make decisions for themselves, trusts evidence over anecdotes, and recognizes that economic stability creates the conditions for personal responsibility to flourish. I've been thinking about this because it is, again, looking at that overall shell game of where the money is, right? So if we have, and you can fill me in on what you think the employment profile is of
Mhm.
families with SNAP, but let's just say they're working at a big box store and their living wage is low. So those companies, those big companies, are employing hundreds of thousands of people
Mhm.
across the United States. They are able to pay their employees such a low rate and they get huge tax breaks from the government. So I guess I just see this as one of these little cycles. Like if we are not insisting that our corporations are paying their
Mm.
employees at the lowest level a living wage so that they can support a family, and yet the CEOs and the higher ups, billions of dollars or whatever the numbers are. I'm drawing a broad picture. But then somewhere the federal government has to have a job in this, or pay people more so that they can live
Mhm.
on what's available, right? Our
Yeah.
prices, like you said, of groceries are going up, fuel is going up.
Ugh.
Anyway, I just find this to be such a big conundrum, and I don't know what the answer is, but I think that, the cut of SNAP is really troublesome for those reasons in particular.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair and correct. I think that's also why, we can't talk about hunger in a box, that there's just this one solution, right? We also talked about the interconnected with Medicaid or with different costs, but there's so much about what is affordable housing for people? What are the wages on this? And it's they have to be talked about together. It all goes back to the affordability crisis, I think. I think about early in COVID, where so many people lost their jobs immediately. There was no, here's a 4 week notice. People were out of work and they got delivery driver jobs or what were things they could pick up in their neighborhood. They were underemployed in this case and where their wages had been. So all of this we have to talk about together because that's what will strengthen our society.
You were talking about earlier how you've been speaking to people on the legislative. So tell me what's going on there.
Well, in New York, I feel very lucky that we have people on both sides of the aisle that want to talk about this, that looked at implementing universal school meals, that have concerns about SNAP costs. There's bipartisan support in New York State for a minimum SNAP benefit that the state would help to subsidize. There's a lot of questions about the impact in their communities and what can people do. So I think people are seeing it. I think I don't know if I'd call it a challenge, but as with HR1 and the $200 billion in SNAP cuts, they were not felt immediately. And there are some changes with work requirements and people eligible now, but the more benefit cut rolls out over the next few years. And I think where people may say, oh, this is not a huge deal yet, they are learning that. So I spend a lot of time saying, here is the timeline. Let's talk about which fiscal year this is and really making sure it's clear. Because I do think part of HR1 was just putting wrong information out there or making it so confusing that people wouldn't understand. So I take very seriously the obligation to get the word out. It's one of the reasons I'm so happy to talk today and to talk to elected officials and to be there on this. While I'm based in New York, I have colleagues across the country that are meeting with governors' offices. They were in Tennessee in the last couple of weeks working on the summer grocery benefit program. We're hearing positive things very close to that in Georgia as well. So I think elected officials are hearing more and more from their constituents. I think the holdup of SNAP benefits scared a lot of people in November, and they're realizing they have to do something. Will it be enough to fix this? That hasn't happened yet. In the last few weeks, the House Agriculture Committee had their first markup bill discussion on the Farm Bill. They didn't roll back any of the cuts to SNAP. They had a chance to do that and they didn't. I hope as the process continues, the Senate does that, and maybe the House will do that change. But right now, the House hasn't done what they should have done.
And you and your colleagues, are you there on that federal stage as well with congressional representatives and senators?
Yes, one of the nice things about No Kid Hungry is we have staff in a lot of different roles. So we have a team that is based in Washington, D.C., that is on Capitol Hill every day and talking and sending out information. I think what I then get to do is to really personalize it and say, I want to make sure that this representative, outside of Buffalo is hearing what that local impact is or what's going on in the North Country. Can you send this there? So we take almost a two-prong approach that I think it's here's the policy, here's what's happening at a national level. You need to hear what it looks like in your community. So we're really able to work together on that.
And the survey that you did, that's really drilling down on the family level, like what's happening, what their challenges
Yes.
are, what kind of decisions they're being forced to make.
We have done a survey of New Yorkers for the last few years. And each time I think it can't get worse, it pretty much does. And we are continuing to hear how hard it is. I think one of our biggest takeaways this year is 3/4 of families told us that they're making trade offs. It's not just in theory about paying their rent or paying for food. 3/4 of respondents told us they have to do that. That's heartbreaking when you think how hard people are working. We had a single parent tell us that they've had to take on 2 additional part time jobs because of all the rising costs. And even with that, they're having a really hard time making ends meet. And they said, I'm buying rice. I'm not buying the apples my children want or that protein, but I have to do this much extra work in order to do that. We had half of New Yorkers, about the same as last year, say they're taking on more debt to pay for their groceries. And that's not somebody who says, I'm putting it on my credit card to get airline miles. This is somebody that is going into their savings. We had actually 2 different individuals in Suffolk County on Long Island. One has to put off retirement because of the rising costs, and someone else is borrowing against their 401k to pay for their groceries. That's not what it should be. And to think that people are having to make these devastating choices for something like food, it kills me when I read this. And when I hear, again, we've had families tell us they hide food in their house because they know their SNAP benefits are going to run out and they need to make sure there is food for the children at the end of the month. So they are putting canned beans and other shelf stable food in their closet to make sure that child can eat at the end of the month. I would like to hear somebody tell me they're okay with that because I don't know how anyone could say that. We've got to do better.
One of the less discussed consequences of food insecurity is the amount of mental bandwidth it consumes. Research on scarcity has found that when people are forced to constantly manage shortages, whether of money, food, or time, the cognitive load can be equivalent to losing significant mental capacity in the moment. What emerges from these stories is not simply a lack of food, but a society asking families to become full-time risk managers. Parents are calculating how to stretch benefits across a month, deciding which bills can be delayed, monitoring pantry inventories, and creating contingency plans for future shortages. The hidden cost is that energy spent worrying about survival cannot be invested elsewhere in career advancement, education, parenting, community involvement, or long-term financial planning. In this sense, hunger programs do more than provide food. They create predictability, and predictability is often the foundation upon which families build stability, opportunity, and upward mobility. When that predictability erodes, the effects ripple far beyond the dinner table, shaping how people think about their futures and what possibilities feel available to them.
Oh, and families talking about their mental health and what this does. And it's their physical health when you're not eating those healthy foods, what that does to you, and the mental strain that it takes for somebody that is working multiple jobs. They are doing everything they can to take care of their families. And because of rising costs or decisions that are not being made thoughtfully, they are facing this challenge. And so I try to share those stories as often as possible, more so to say, this is why we have to do better and look at this hardship. But I think what I would also say is the poll does give me hope each year when I get 90% of more than 90% of New Yorkers telling me ending child hunger should be a bipartisan solution. They don't support this. Majority of them said that the SNAP cuts are devastating and shouldn't have happened. And while the poll that we did in the last few months is focused on New York, this is consistent in our findings that we do in every state, that people feel this way. And so we want to keep getting the word out about that.
Well, I think you're doing a great job doing that.
Thank
And
you.
I appreciate you like laying out a lot of these things that people need to think about
Mhm.
so that they can't be hidden and that's
Mhm.
less confusing about what
Yes.
we're facing. That's really, I think, really important. What can our listeners do to help?
There are so many ways that listeners can help, and I'm going to be a little cheesy. While I do work for the No Kid Hungry campaign, we're part of Share Our Strength. Everybody has a strength to share. And so I encourage listeners to get the word out. If you see a program in your community or you know that there's a free summer meals program, make sure other families know about this because sometimes people don't realize or there is some shame or stigma. I don't want anyone to feel that way. That's why universal school meal programs are so great. You don't know somebody's income when the children are eating breakfast together. And I've had so many people talk to me about growing up on free school meals and how hard it was because kids made fun of them. And now their children are in a different position and they're like, my child eats breakfast at school every day. So another child doesn't feel the way I did. So getting the word out, I encourage listeners to raise their voices to all levels of government and to make clear how important this is. And all of these programs are and how interconnected they are. It takes all of us raising our voice to do that. I also encourage people, if you can volunteer, if you can donate, there are so many ways to get involved in communities. And as the hunger crisis worsens, a lot of the local organizations are going to need more volunteers than ever before. The majority of food pantries and soup kitchens are volunteer run. And so how they can get other people, how they can get targeted support, ask them, what is it that you need? When I used to work for the food bank for New York City, and something we heard a lot from food pantries and soup kitchens was about items like menstrual products, like deodorant. Your SNAP benefits don't pay for items like that. But those are a struggle for people. So sometimes that is what's most needed and it's shelf stable so it can last a while. Because it's shelf stable, you don't get the same donations of those items from corporations. But, get to know people, continue to raise their voice on this, on hunger, on the farm programs, on the economic impact. They're all interconnected and we've got to work together to save them.
It is always so good to have Rachel Sabella on the show. And as you heard from her today, child hunger isn't really just about food. It's about whether a child can focus in school, whether they can participate in sports and activities, whether they can stay healthy, whether they have the same opportunity to succeed as the child sitting next to them. One of the things that struck me during this conversation is that hunger is often invisible. We may not see it when we walk through our communities, but families all around us are making impossible choices between food, housing, transportation, healthcare, and other necessities. And for many children, programs like school breakfast, school lunch, summer meals, and SNAP are the difference between having enough to eat and going without. This is also a reminder that food systems aren't just about farms, restaurants, grocery stores, or what's on our dinner plates. They're about people. They're about access. They're about whether the systems we've built are actually serving the communities that depend on them. If today's conversation moved you, I encourage you to learn more about the organizations and programs working to address childhood hunger in your own community. Awareness matters, advocacy matters, and sometimes even small actions can help ensure that a child gets the meal they need. Thanks for listening to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. If today's conversation sparked something for you, remember, the stories you hear here don't end when the episode does. Through the For Farmers movement, these stories become action, supporting small farmers and bringing eaters like you closer to the people who make your food possible. You can learn more at forfarmersmovement.com. You can also follow along for more facts, red flags on Instagram at XOXOFarmGirl. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review One Bite is Everything on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people like you find the show and helps us continue having conversations that matter. One Bite is Everything is in the top 3% globally, with more engagement than 88% of podcasts on Spotify. With over 165 episodes, we're committed to bringing you stories that connect food to the bigger issues shaping our lives. This episode was co-produced by Sonia Dillon with sound design and original music by Russell Chapa. I'm your host, Dana DePrima, and I'll see you here again next week for another episode of One Bite is Everything. Until next week, eat like it matters, because it does.